Again, unprecedented times in our nation. Been around a little while now, and I've never seen or thought I would see something like this, how quickly things could change and it could be shut down. And I know a lot of us, especially those who are small businesses, even employees, people who are self-employed, are very concerned about the uncertainties. How do I keep the doors open? What's going to happen to my business? Uh, I, I wanted at the outset to say that, my style in presenting has always been to use some humor, and I'll do that here. Way am I trying to minimize the seriousness of the situation, especially for those sick and suffering. And just terrible. And as I've said before, not only for those with the coronavirus, but many other illnesses and trials that people go through in our nation and around the world. So our thoughts and prayers go out, particularly at this time. Thought I'd give a bit of an introduction. My name's Steve McNeely. I'm the managing partner of a father and son firm in East Texas. And we've been in practice for, turns out, a long time now. And Dad is still active, although he's certainly earned retirement. Most important, the most important thing to me is being called Grandpop. So we have five beautiful grandchildren. But when we're not doing that, we love to help those that help people succeed in their small businesses. The purpose for this webinar is to give kind of a broad strokes overview and an introduction of what's available. So we can get our head around. You have to remember the overarching purpose for these legislative moves is to help businesses stay open, keep their employees, and be able to pay their employees during this unprecedented crisis. It's aimed towards those who are actually harmed by the economic fallout. And as we just saw, if you haven't seen already, not too long ago, the House did pass this, so I'm sure the bill will be signed into law very quickly. And so, and from that then, obviously some administrative guidelines will come out. I'm wondering how in the world the SBA is going to administer all this in a short time, but I'm sure they'll do their best to step up. A little bit of a roadmap on where we're going. We'll look at Internal Revenue Code Section 139, which gives some relief if you have to reimburse your employees. A couple of days ago, the SBA came out with an up to $25,000 bridge loan. We'll touch on that. Already, as of the 31st, people could apply for these SBA economic injury loans. And we'll talk about the Family First Act, the CARE Act, which is what just got passed. And inside of that, it has an enormous, it's 880 pages. I waded through a lot of it. We're not going to really touch on the personal portions today. the stimulus checks that will be coming out, and of course, expanded unemployment benefits and a lot of things like that. There's an enormous amount. It's a lot of stuff in this bill. So we'll focus mainly on these emergency grants that you can get, the Paycheck Protection Program loans, and some business provisions that will impact you at this point. We'll talk about how these interact. And I've actually put together a chart that compares these things, and we'll post that on our website, and as long as with other details as we get them out. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about an initial plan that maybe we can take to kind of survive and stay in business and take advantage of these things. And of course, answer questions as best we can. Hey, Craig, I see that. I'm going to go over some of these, the information. These different loans have different requirements. So anyway, again, thank you all so much for being here. And again, we're not trying to cover this in detail. I'm not going to go into a lot of the details, even about how some of these calculations go. But let's just jump into it because I don't want to make this long. So the first thing is the SBA just came out with this bridge loan, and a bridge loan pilot program. And this is supposed to be streamlined to be able to get you very quick help while waiting to apply for other aid. This is up to $25,000. Now, you have to have an existing relationship with one of the SBA banks doing this. And we're going to be working hard to try and find out around here who is doing that now. We found a bank or two and we've talked to them, but we have some work to do there. So again, we're going to post this on our website. We'll be coming out with email updates, and we're just trying to be very proactive in this because we didn't realize how serious this is. You know, we've had people that have put years and decades into building something that suddenly now just feels like it's tottering on the brink of failure. I don't think that's going to happen if we help each other and we stay strong and we be smart. And so that's what we're here to do. This loan it can be up to 7 years, but it is a little more expensive. It's prime plus 6.5%. And the banks may put in here that you have to pay this back if you get proceeds from some of the other loans that are available. This one is one you have to qualify for, have a decent credit score. I think throw your tax return out and up there and some of those things. So we'll have some more details on that, but I make you aware of that, and that's probably something you should look into pretty quickly. Go to your bank, go to your lenders, and talk to them if they have this available. Of course, some people have already started working on the disaster loan. As soon as this was declared, a national disaster, well, SBA started bringing these loans out. Now, the way these were originally structured, you had to go through a pretty good application process. You had several forms you filled out, had to show the ability to repay collateral for loans over $25,000. These were up to $2 million. Now, the changes that came through today are this on these type loans. And let me pull this up under my notes. Okay, so this is for businesses up to 500 employees, and it includes sole proprietors with or without employees. Now, no personal guarantee is needed for loans under this up to $200,000. You have to have been in business January 31st, 2020, but not for a full year. The requirements used to be that. Used to be that you had to look for credit elsewhere first and then come try and get this loan. That doesn't apply. And you don't have to submit tax returns. They will approve this based on your credit score. So part of this CARE Act that was just passed is to streamline this process as well. And we'll talk in a little bit about how this maybe dovetails with other opportunities. Okay, moving on to let's see, did I hit the right slide? No, I wanted to go and talk. This came out earlier. And we sent out some information on this on the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And this was basically as this hit and people were having to go home and be quarantined or self-quarantined, or now we're seeing widespread shutdowns. Even around here in East Texas, we're very blessed to have few instances of coronavirus, yet we have some counties and municipalities that are determining to shut down. I think, isn't it through the 3rd, if I'm not mistaken, most of these around here. So this was basically, it was kind of buried in there, but this was basically for the government to reimburse small businesses for giving sick leave for 2 weeks. And basically there it said, well, this is a person who had coronavirus symptoms and is seeking medical help, is caring for a child whose school or daycare has been closed, or an employee that's ordered to be in quarantine, or advised by a healthcare provider. So this impacts an enormous amount of people now. The amount to pay on this then was 2 weeks or 10 full working days. Full-time employees would get paid 80 hours at their normal rate. It's limited to $500 a day. Part-time people would get paid a pro rata amount based on their average, what's their average working schedule. So that's the first 2 weeks. And then they kind of expanded the Family Medical Leave Act. It's basically to 12 weeks, but you don't have to pay anything the first 2 weeks because the paid sick leave is supposed to cover that. But let me jump in quickly too, because people were very concerned about this. How do I pay for this? Initially, this was going to be paid for as a credit to payroll tax reporting, let's say in a future quarter. And suddenly then in the CARE Act, I think that people began to realize, wait, we're asking small business to finance the sick pay we've asked them to do. And so they're going to make provision. I haven't seen anything in detail on this for you to be able to apply for an advance, so to speak, on the sick pay that you've got to pay out. So everybody needs to be aware of that and watch for that as that comes out. So anyway, then I'm sure most of us are small businesses. less than 500 employees. If you have less than 50 employees, this act did say there are rules coming out to say how to claim exemption if keeping the new law might keep you out of business. I haven't seen anything on that. And I think probably, again, with everything that's available, I think everyone wants to jump in and try and keep employees if possible. This did say, too, that it covers workers that have been employed for at least 30 days. The new act, I believe, changed that. That's not a requirement anymore. So it's kind of expanded that. We'll come out with some details. The reason for this leave, though, is your employee needs to care for a child who's under 18, whose school or daycare has been closed due to the coronavirus. Well, I challenge us to find a school or daycare. Well, I think in Texas, some daycares have not been ordered to shut down yet. No, they're not. They haven't. But in a lot of places, they probably have. So this is a big challenge for a lot of people and very applicable. This is the employee will be paid 2/3 of his or her normal pay according to a regular rate and the usual schedule, whether full-time or part-time. It's up to $200 a day, and it's a $10,000 total. And there are some requirements to reinstate people if reinstate people if you have more than 25 employees. You must try and reinstate that employee when they can come back to work. Less than 25, you have to make a good faith effort to try if the job is still there. And so many uncertainties. So again, how's this going to happen? It's a credit against the matching FICA portion of payroll taxes. But you can, so that'll be reported strangely and weird coming up. And I'll have to change all the forms and what we do. But now, again, the CARE Act says we can make an application to get this up front. And this starts on April the 2nd. So it hasn't kicked in yet. We have just enormous amounts of time to figure this out. Okay. So I had Hunt was saying the DFW area is saying mid-May, if not shut down, they can only run a skeleton crew. Well, I think we found here we have a client that's actually a small daycare center, and that, of course, most people are just saying we're keeping our kids home. Oh wow. Smith County, where Tyler is, sorry I mean, this is so fluid and it's just happening. Smith County, where Tyler is just announced a 2-week shelter-in-place order. Wow. Wow. So here we thought in Texas we were doing pretty well, and again we have very few, 20 in Smith County. 20 cases in Smith County, but yeah, this is what it is. You know, we could debate for a long time and probably will into a long time whether there's been an appropriate and measured response based on the threat. And of course, one human life is precious. But anyway, so there's this. This is a part that you need to be aware of, and that you have to do for your employees. It's mandated. Okay, now, real quick on sick pay. Sure. You have a question on sick pay? Okay, is the sick pay funded by the government? Yes, the answer is yes. And the way they were going to originally do it is through a credit to future taxes you would pay in, but now they're going to offer some sort of an advance against that. And the way these things have happened in the past, sometimes it's even like the Obamacare insurance. If you were getting a credit, you would estimate your earnings and maybe you get partial credit against your premiums. Then when you really file your tax return, you might either owe money or not owe money. And it's probably going to be something similar. Hey, I estimate my sick pay costs are going to be this. Uncle Sam says, here's a check. And then you report later and it's like, okay, you owe me some more money. I owe you a little. But the intent is for the government to fund this sick pay and this leave pay. I'm tripping over my water bottles. Okay. So thank you for that. Okay, this emergency grant, if you will. So this is really important. Now, if you're making, we're going to cover the loans, but if you're applying for one of these loans, within 3 days they're supposed to give a grant of $10,000, and it can be used for sick pay advances or payroll or materials or rent or just other obligations. This is basically sort of like a grant. Now this, even if your loan is not approved, you can keep this $10,000. If it is approved, it will reduce any future loan forgiveness amounts. And we'll have to get into that because the paycheck loans, a portion of it can be turned into actually a government grant as well. We'll talk about that in a second. But this is so important that as soon as people begin applying for these SBA loans, boom, you got to ask for this emergency grant to get some cash. And I'm sure more details, and we'll be providing details on how to do this as soon as they come out. Obviously, this is, well, it's not even law yet, unless the president signed it already while we're speaking, but it will be law. It will be law. Okay, so this Paycheck Protection Program, this is a huge amount of money that's been allocated to small business to help people keep their employees and pay them. So I'm going to take a little bit of time to walk through this. And so this applies from the period of February 15th to June 30. And it applies to small business and self-employed people. Now, you had to be in business on February 15th, and you actually paid employees or contractors. It doesn't have to be just employees. If your workforce is largely contractors, that counts. And then you will have to make a good faith certification that, hey, I'm hurting businesses down because of the crisis. I'm not sure, maybe other than toilet paper manufacturers who cannot answer that question in good conscience. Now, payroll costs are defined this way, and it's important to understand this. It's salaries, wages, commissions, tips, vacation leave, severance pay. It's group health benefits. It's state payroll taxes. It doesn't include IRS, so when you're going to have to do this calculation. It does not include IRS payroll taxes. It does not include pay to employees living outside the U.S. And it does not include sick and family leave pay covered under the prior act. It also is limited to $100,000 per employee per year. The same thing with people who are self-employed. The way they'll handle self-employed is probably have a year look back. A lot of these do have a year look back. What's the average over a year? And that's the amount that you could qualify for. Now, this check protection loan is 2 times the average payroll cost that I just enumerated. So you do this calculation and you get a total. This is our average monthly payroll and taking all this stuff into account. And I think the look back is 12 months, if I'm not mistaken. There are special rules for seasonal workers and new businesses. So there's always complexities. But in general, it's a look back over the last year. What's average payroll? Multiply that times 2.5. That's the amount of loan you can apply for. And there's a $10 million maximum. So now these proceeds, we have to understand in a lot of these things, the proceeds, even on the disaster loans, those disaster loans are meant to cover costs that you would have paid otherwise if the disaster hadn't intervened. So it's not for expansion or new business or new machines. It's for machines if they got destroyed or whatever. So we have to understand here, these programs are, in the spirit of them, is to help people keep in business, keep the doors open, keep employees paid. You have another question?
Yeah. What about a contractor who gets a 1099?
Yes, they count. Not only can they apply for this loan if you're a contractor, that counts like an employee under payroll costs. Okay, so okay, I got one. Some grant meeting we'll have to pay back. Regarding the previous section, yes, on that $10,000 emergency grant, you do not have to pay that back, but it may reduce the amount that you get treated as a grant under this program. So there are all these things are all kind of intertwined. This is law, and the IRS we're dealing with. It's nothing simple. So now what you can use this for is payroll costs, interest on mortgage payments, and prior loans. So if you had an outstanding loan before February 15th, you can use this to cover interest there. It does not require collateral for this loan. There's no prepayment penalty, and loans are non-recourse. So in other words, if this loan is applied for through another entity, a corporation or a partnership or an LLC, the individual shareholders or partners or members are not going to be held liable personally for these loans. The exception is if they would be used for the wrong purpose. If you take this money and go buy a Ferrari, then you could be in trouble. But if it's just used for this, there's not going to be a problem. Sorry, I popped out of the. I had an itchy mouse finger. So now let's talk about this loan forgiveness. So this is where this actually turns into a grant, and it gets a little complicated. So we borrowed this amount of money. We've calculated our payroll costs. We've asked for 2.5 times that. We've got that money. We're spending it maybe on some reduced payroll. We're spending it on the things that are allowed. And we have this loan balance on our books. Now what happens is we're able to make application, and you have to have proper documentation behind it to get reimbursed, as it were, actually to get the loan forgiven for 8 weeks of actual expenses. And what counts there are payroll costs, mortgage interest, not other loan interest, rent, and utilities. Now, utilities include phone, internet services. So what happens is, okay, we borrowed, let's use, we borrowed $100,000, and in 8 weeks we used, 80,000 of it for these things. The federal government will cancel, or they'll actually pay the banks that principal, that 80,000, leaving you with a $20,000 note. And
does this include contract?
Yes, contract. Yeah, it says that in several places in here. This includes contractors, they've made it a point to include self-employed individuals as well. They've also expanded the unemployment provisions for gig workers and other people. So anyway, now this loan forgiveness, we have to bear this in mind. It is reduced. If your average employee level, if you had 100 employees over the last year, and all of a sudden you have 60 at the end of June, the amount that gets forgiven is going to be reduced by that reduction in your payroll. It can also be reduced if you cut people's pay that make less than $100,000 more than 25%. So for every person who got their pay hacked in survival mode, that's taken into account, and there's kind of a complicated formula. And so it means we may start at, we're getting 80,000 forgiven out of our note, but based on the realities, we had to cut payroll and this and that. And so we may only get 70,000 actually forgiven. The other thing is there is a provision in there to cure this. So let's say some of us have already had to make moves and lay people off, but we're able to bring them back before June 30th. It can cure this forgiveness portion by evening out that. So there's a provision in there to be able to do that.
Craig would like to know about current equipment lease payments.
Yeah, there's nothing, well, now, that's an interesting point, Craig, on those leases, and that's maybe a technicality we have to look up in terms of it allows interest on prior loans. And, some leases are more like financing agreements, so that's probably something we'll have to dig in. It's a great question. We're going to try, we'll answer all these questions and try and do so for the group. Well, so now we also, so let's say we have a balance left after the forgiveness of $20,000. They're going to give very generous terms, at least 6 months deferral on payments, and I think it's up to 10 years. I've got it in my notes here. We'll put that detail up.
Cutoff date June 30th.
Yes, cutoff date's June 30th. Let's see, these loans I think get extended, have a maximum term of 10 years at a rate not above 4%. So these are very, very generous loans. Okay. So again, this is a hybrid. Again, we have maybe the chance for $10,000 advance. We then get a paycheck loan. Something else I wanted to point out. You can also add to the amount of this 2.5 times payroll costs a refinance from an existing disaster loan made after the 31st. So if you've already rushed out and got a disaster loan, you can roll that into this program. You can pay that off. You can't double dip. You can't do two. You can't, if you have that and you've used it for payroll, you can't count those numbers against this. They've got some specific provisions about that. Okay, 10-minute warning. Okay, I'll try and wrap this up then. That's the most complicated area. There's some general business provisions. If people have to shut down fully or partially and they keep their employees, there is a credit against future payroll taxes that will be allowed, and it's 50% of the Social Security, 50% of wages up to $10,000 per employee per quarter. Is kind of complicated, but you can be aware of that. You're able to hang on to people, but you had shut down. There's a credit coming. They'll get you some of that money back. Corporate estimated taxes are not due until October 15th, so they're really trying to help people with cash flow. Now, it doesn't mean you may not owe them eventually, but it means they're not due. They're no longer due in the typical dates.
The grants taxed as income for 2020.
I did not see anywhere where these grants are taxed as income. I didn't see that. I mean, I will double check that, but I don't believe so at all. That's a good point, though. I think probably obviously some of this that comes back as a reimbursement against some of these expenses, you're not going to be able, it's going to reduce your expenses. So in that essence, maybe it is taxable. In other words, if you had $20,000 of payroll expense and the government paid you for 10, I don't think they're going to let you keep that 10 and take 20 off. You take the net 10 off. Probably how that's going to work, but that makes sense actually. There are extended due dates for the matching portion of Social Security of FICA. So instead of having to make those payroll tax deposits as you normally would, 50% is due at the end of this year, and the balance is due at the end a year from now. So in essence, the government is financing part of your payroll taxes to try and free that up for you to use for operating cash flow to stay in business. Okay, and I'm going to move. I just have one last slide here, I think. Now, what is the strategy? How are we going to survive?
Before you get into that,
okay.
From non-employed contractors count as employees for the retention tax credits.
From what I understand, they're treating employees and contractors the same way in the math. I mean, I'll double and triple check that, but all the language and even the other articles I've read about that point that out. So I believe that's just kind of interchangeable now. When you talk about payroll costs, that includes payments to contractors. People that receive 1099 miscellaneous for non-employee compensation. But again, we'll double check all these questions. We'll try and circle back on it. Oh, my hand is in the way, apparently. Okay, so we got to survive. I think as we've heard from some people, you need to reach out to your vendors. And I think it's important also to say specifically what I've seen in certain cases, you may be handled on a case-by-case basis. Some I've seen, our little local bank around here has actually sent out a thing saying, hey, you can automatically just defer 2 months of payments if you want at the end of the loan. But you reach out and you tell them you've got problems because of the coronavirus. And I think that's a magic word you need to use. You probably need to apply for this bridge loan with an existing bank. So go to your existing bank immediately, say, you guys supporting this pilot program for the SBA bridge loan. Let's make sure your books and records are current so you can do these necessary calculations. And of course, that's what we do. We fill out forms for a living. So apply for the advance on sick pay costs as soon as the regs are out on how to do that. And again, we'll post all this stuff as quickly as it becomes available. And you could apply for a traditional cash flow loan or use your existing lines if you have them, because I don't know how long it's going to take. They're talking about 3 weeks for these stimulus checks to come. How long is it going to take for the SBA to process these loan apps? I mean, they're obviously just going to get buried, and they probably already are. So I don't know how long that's going to take. We'll keep an eye out for that as well. So you may want to just go for, as a bridge, do a traditional loan if you've got some collateral or some lines that are available. You may want to consider this, and I don't know what, since this is kind of new under the CARE Act, at first I was telling people hold off on the disaster loans till we see what's in the CARE Act. And now that we know what's in there, and we know that you can refinance a disaster loan under the paycheck loan, maybe it's a good idea to get the ball rolling on that. I mean, I'm going to do a little more research to figure out, but that definitely is a potential strategy that you could roll that into the new loan and then potentially have part of it forgiven. So that is something to consider. Obviously, apply for the Paycheck Protection Loan based on payroll, and apply for that emergency $10,000 grant immediately, so you get a little bit of cash. That again, maybe, again, if your loan's not approved, you get to keep the 10,000. So it's just silly not to do the paperwork, and at least you get 10,000 bucks. And see if you can rehire laid off workers by June 30 to increase the amount of the loan that can be forgiven. That's one thing to consider wisely as you look at the future and cash flow. And how in the world do we do that? I mean, this is again unprecedented. There's nothing to compare this with, to my mind. Yeah.
Probably Spencer would like to know, if we apply for these loans, just accrue pay that we owe employees if we don't have cash to pay now.
Can you
How
accrue?
do you,
Can you accrue the pay to employees? That's a good question. I'm sure it would count because you're still going to make a paycheck. So if you're saying to people, hey, I don't have the cash to pay you right now, hang around, we're not terminating you. We're basically accruing, future pay duty to you till we get these things. Then surely that would count. Let's see, I'd have to look, but again, I think the math started on like February 15th going backward. So if you're accruing pay from before February 15th, it probably isn't going to help. I don't know. They might be able to do some accounting ledger domain and make it happen. That's a good question.
when can you start applying for loans?
I don't know when we can start applying for loans. I mean, we'll just let you know. I know you can apply right now for the bridge loan. I know you can apply right now for the SBA disaster loan. When you're going to be able to apply for this emergency, this paycheck protection loan, I don't know. So I'm sure they're scrambling and people are working their heads off trying to make this happen. It should be imminent. I mean, hopefully next week, I would think. And again, we're going to be on top of this stuff. And if you're on our mailing list or whatever, we plan to do some more webinars, perhaps one on the individual side of this, and some other things. If we find things out how to do this stuff, we'll try and put that out.
Will you be working with local banks or the SBA for one?
You go through the SBA. You go through the SBA on these loans, and that's the way it always works. They then come back to an approved lender.
But the bridge is through the.
No, okay, the bridge loan, that's a good point, AJ. The bridge loan, you can go directly to your, are you sure? You have to apply. Okay, the bridge loan, you could go directly to your lender. But these other loans will be through the SBA, apparently. I mean,
they're an approved SBA lender.
If they're an approved SBA lender and you have an existing relationship with them. Those are the criteria for the bridge loans. But I think at this point, it's, all you can hear is no or something like that, and then there are other options, So I would do everything. I would throw everything against the wall you can, see what sticks. We need to know the rules and stay on top of the rules to defer these payments. So don't keep doing. To my mind, I would suggest not doing payroll tax deposits the way you have. In fact, the IRS came up, what was it called, the People First Initiative or something, where they're really relaxing rules on a lot of things. We'll get that out as well. It's your kinder, friendlier IRS on steroids. So a lot of things in terms of collection efforts and all that are, they're very sensitive. That there's a lot of trouble in trying to help.
What's the cap for the bridge loan?
25,000 is the cap for the bridge loan. And I said stay tuned. Well. I suggest classic rock. You're gonna stay tuned. Okay, so that's, we're a little over really appreciate everybody attending. And I will try and answer a few if there's some questions here.
Got one from James Burton.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. Do you have to rehire the same people? I do know under the family leave provisions, you are supposed to try and bring the same people back to that job. But I don't know in terms of, I didn't see anything specifically in the law itself. And you have to remember that there may be technical corrections that come out, and there will certainly be regulations that are explanations of this huge piece of legislation. But that may not be feasible. That somebody may have gotten another job, or who knows what. That you had to lay them off in March, and then you go back in May and you're ready to rehire. They may not be available. So I think it's more of a count thing. How many employees did you have? How many do you have? Let's do the math on the difference. I think. Thank you, Hunt. I think I would hold on. This may be terrible advice, and so I'll say like we do in our compilation letters. If I'm wrong, somehow it's your fault. But I think I would probably hold off on paying payroll taxes. Let us get something back to you there, and at least maybe you could do a reduced amount. I do know that there are collection efforts. In fact, we have in Texas has sent something out, and I don't have that in front of me. We put it on our website. They're working with people in terms of when payments are due, isn't that right? And holding off on interest and penalty. No, interest, I think they have to charge. Everybody's got to charge interest by statute, but penalties. So even the Texas comptroller is working with people. But that's a great question. And what we're going to go through these, and hopefully you have our email address or my email or somebody, and reach out with specific questions, and we will probably answer to the group most of these questions that look like good ones.
Randy's question.
Where's that?
Do employment agreements apply to compensation under paycheck protection loan?
Employment agreements. So you mean if you've got a contract? Yeah, that's tricky. That's like an HR attorney question. If you actually have a contract with somebody, I imagine all bets are off in one sense or another. That's what we'll have to look up. I learned a long time ago to say, when I first started practicing, I thought I had to know everything every time, and now I'm okay saying, you know what, I don't know. We'll look it up, but we will. Anything else? So I know there's a lot of stuff here. This was a quick hit. I hope it gave an overview. I think you'll find this chart that I'm putting together helpful if I can get it done today, maybe Sunday before we get it out. But it basically kind of lists all these things, and it's like, okay, how do these work? And some of it has to be clarified too now that they've changed some things. But anyway, that'll kind of give you a comparison. And then we're just going to keep trying to flood you guys with information. Look, we got to help each other, and I've always felt this way. And even if you look at it, a small business is the backbone of America. It's the engine that drives this country. And it's always been about entrepreneurs and people building things. And so that is what we can do.